Hi, I'm Neil. I've never really had much confidence. My dad used to be a Marine, and he wanted me to be like him. A manly man who loved cars and hunting and being, as he called it, an alpha. I would go off on a tangent and say how the whole alpha male concept is a total hoax and alphas don't exist in nature. But Dad would just disregard me and make me do 50 push-ups. Ugh. Let's just say I wasn't the son Dad was hoping for. He wanted someone who he could bond with doing testosterone-charged activities. And, well, I'm more of a talker and less of a doer. Every time he'd throw a football at me, I'd just fumble around in the air with my hands, and the ball would eventually find its way straight into my face. Dad would laugh, and we'd do it all over again. He'd take me on hikes every weekend, and he'd make me jog as if I was in boot camp. And if I ever stopped for a rest, he'd punish me by making me do even more push-ups. I did get pretty ripped, but I was still not the hardened military man Dad wanted me to become. I was more interested in design and beautiful things. And Dad despised that. I took to making model houses and buildings. It took me months building my very first model house. And I realized then and there that I wanted to be an architect. Well, until my dad saw what I'd been up to, and he threw the model house on the ground and trampled all over it until it was nothing but sticks and broken pieces of plastic.
No son of mine will act like some fruit!
It's what I'm passionate about, Dad! I want to be an architect!
That's a job for weaker men. You are not gonna grow up to be a disappointment. You're gonna be in the Army. Or the Navy. I'm calling up the general today, and you better have your bags packed.
Dad sent me to boot camp that very same day, and it was pure torment. The days were filled with training and shouting and mud, and all I wanted was to build stuff, while the people around me were focused on tearing things down and blowing things up. I was allowed to go back home a year later. I planned on begging my dad to let me stay, but I was met with a much bigger problem. Dad had found a girl. Her name was Lola, and she was the daughter of one of his old Navy friends. Everything had been arranged. The moment I hopped off the taxi, Dad dragged me to a small chapel in town. Our families were there, and we got married before I even got to unpack my luggage. I had no say in the matter. I was shipped off back to barracks in just a week. I said goodbye to my new wife. We hardly spoke to each other, and I barely knew anything about her. So it wasn't a tearful goodbye. Felt more like telling your local plumber that you're going away for a while. They deployed me to some port in a faraway island that nobody wanted to go to. I did. It was peaceful. There was no real danger. And I got to spend most of my time swimming with the locals. One of them was called Yuna. She and I would meet at the beach every day. She surfed, and I watched her while I learned how to swim. She taught me how to dive, and she showed me how beautiful the underwater world was. I saw my first stingray with her, my first turtle. Every weekend, we'd free dive into the reef's depths and discover a cosmos that had 1,000,000 more colors than the world above. One day, I was geeking out over some clownfish when Yuna tapped me on the shoulder. I looked at her, and her eyes were wild with wonder. She pointed just beyond the reef. And then, I saw it too. A shadow, moving gracefully into full view. Closer and closer it came, and suddenly, there it was! Passing right in front of us like a submarine made of flesh and bone. It was the first and only time I'd ever seen a whale that close. It was so magical. Like seeing a unicorn in the wild. For a second, the whale and I locked eyes. It was as if he said hello, without even saying any words. Yuna and I were so caught up in the magic of the moment, and we kissed. It was my first real kiss, and it happened underwater. I never thought it was possible to be so in love with someone, and yet there I was, alone in a tropical island with a beautiful girl, and I was smitten. Nothing could tear us apart. Until the Navy told me I was to be transferred back home. When I said goodbye to my wife, I felt nothing. When I was forced to leave Yuna behind, I was in tears. On the Jeep, on the plane, in the car that took me back to my childhood home, I was inconsolable. When I opened the door without knocking and found my own father kissing my wife, I didn't even stop crying about Yuna. Seeing them be so blatantly cheating on me didn't even shock me. It didn't even offend me.
Son, I didn't know you'd be back so soon. It's not what it looks like.
My wife didn't even try to defend herself. She simply cuddled even closer to Dad and kissed him again. Dad had to extricate himself from her octopus-like grip to come after me as I went up to my room.
Son, you can't. We're not. You can't tell anyone.
I didn't say a single word to him. I lay down on my bed and thought about Yuna until I fell asleep. I filed for divorce first thing in the morning, and I absolutely told everyone why. I told my lawyer, the judge, our entire family. My mom was already living with her sister, so she didn't even care. She divorced him, and Dad married my ex-wife a month later. I finally decided I was done having my father control every facet of my life. I moved out of the house and used all the money I saved to buy myself a small office. I enrolled in some classes to go after my dream. By day, I'd go to school, and at night, I renovated the small commercial space and slept behind the counter. I brought Yuna into the country, and we lived together in that tiny place. It wasn't a dream home, but we made it work. And Yuna supported me all the way. She helped me study for my exams, and she lent a helping hand as I spent an entire year building up the office to look like how I wanted it to. And a few years later, I graduated. My first client was some rich kid who was 10 years younger than me and had 10 times my net worth. It was tough. I catered to all his wants and needs. And even after I delivered the dream home he envisioned, he trashed me to every other client in town. He even posted disparaging things about me online and told every single one of his friends to never hire me. I got into a lot of debt, and the guy never paid me completely. Yuna had to take another job besides being my receptionist and assistant. It took a strain on us financially and emotionally. For weeks, I was afraid that my dad was right. That maybe this wasn't the right path. But then someone came into the office. A guy I hadn't seen in ages. It was one of my bunkmates from boot camp. He quit the Navy too, and he took over his dad's company. Turned out, they owned one of the largest aquariums in the state, and he remembered that I was a bit of a nerd about underwater dwellings. Their aquarium wanted to build a hotel, and he needed 5 rooms to be designed where guests lived underwater and can freely observe the rich aquatic life their aquariums offered from the comfort of their hotel rooms. Suddenly, I was filled with life again. Yuna and I worked day and night for an entire year, and when it was finished, it was like seeing my own baby take its first steps. My friend was beyond impressed, and his dad was so happy with the results that he even gave me a huge bonus after the project was completed. The rooms became a sensation. Their guests tripled in less than a month, and the demand for more underwater rooms meant I had to build more of them. And just like that, my business became legit. Suddenly, millionaires and billionaires and other companies reached out to me, wanting me to build underwater dwellings for them as well. Yuna and I were flown to Dubai on one of the world's most expensive pieces of real estate. I was paid $100 million to create a gaming room that was also a man cave that extended from the guy's house, and under the beach where there was a man-made coral reef stocked with the most amazing aquatic life. Lionfish and moray eels and manta rays frequented his panoramic windows. He was so happy with the job done that he ended up taking Yuna and I on a helicopter tour of the whole coast. I proposed to Yuna on that trip, and the client was so happy to see us engaged that he even threw a party for us in his brand new underwater game room. I got introduced to even more future clients in that party, and I gotta tell you, I felt foolish for doubting the path I took. I felt stupid to even think that my father was right. Because when I landed back home, I was a multi-millionaire, and my father was in deep debt after having 3 kids with my ex-wife, a woman who had no other hobby but to spend my dad's pension on clothes. Yuna and I got married underwater. Yep, we really did that. Every person in attendance wore scuba gear, and even the priest looked like some spaceman from the future. The backdrop of the ceremony was worth it, though. There were thousands of different corals and even more varieties of fish swimming around everyone. And just as we said our vows, an unmistakable song came at us from a distance. Everyone looked where Yuna pointed, and we all saw it. A shadow, moving in the deep, as if giving us permission and approval. It was a whale. And I know it's impossible, but I like to think it was the very same one that brought Yuna and I together. When we all got back to dry land, I sat Dad and his wife in the kids' table. A bit harsh, you might say, but not at all, because it wasn't even a full minute after I'd just married the love of my life that my ex-wife came to me when no one was looking and tried to kiss me. Your dad barely has any money left. Should we pick up where we left off? I dragged her back to my dad and told him what happened. Dad barely blinked.
She's right. I don't have any money. So why don't you do your old man a favor and loan me a cool $1 million, eh?
I never spoke to them again. But it does bring me the satisfaction that they can watch from afar as I live my best life. Doing what I love. With the woman I love.
Please don't forget to share this podcast on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and so on. Thanks for your support. Check out our YouTube channel by clicking the link in this episode description. And also, kindly please rate and review this podcast. Bye.